if you ran on somebody with Zoran Mamdani's platform in Tennessee, would it work? I don't know. If you ran somebody with Joe Biden's in Tennessee, would it work? No, it didn't. He didn't win. Neither did Kamala's. Neither did Hillary's. Neither did Phil Bredson's. So why keep trying the same dumb shit? That don't work either. So why don't we try something bigger, something bolder, something that acknowledges that this isn't working?
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Corbin Trent, who you heard up top. He's a veteran political operative and observer. Among other things, he was communications director for New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And as it happens, he lives just down the interstate from me. We talked about the current state of the Democratic Party and his new project, America's Undoing, in which he's seeking to lay out a populist platform from the left. That's coming up, and later we'll have a tribute to the greatest drag queen in Arkansas history, who died last week. But first it's time for the weekly news roundup. And I want to talk about a specific event that happened in Nashville a few weeks ago at Tennessee State University, because it illustrates a lot of things about the political and media currents we are immersed in right now. One way I sometimes think about the Trump era is that right-wing media has escaped containment. For decades, a sprawling and often profitable conservative media universe grew and evolved in sort of its own hothouse. It took on escalating significance to the world outside the hothouse. It became home to influential pundits like Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and Tucker Carlson. It became the place all aspiring national politicians on the right gravitated to. But it was still broadly perceived by people outside it as kind of a self-contained and often ridiculous phenomenon, one that could be more or less safely ignored. In the early 2000s, when Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert made a livelihood of mocking Fox News, most of their viewers probably hadn't ever seen the shows they were making fun of. But the audiences for right-wing media grew, while those for more established outlets fractured. Fox News has been the most-watched cable news network since 2002, and is the second most-watched cable channel, period, after ESPN. And yet, throughout all of that, it has remained common to refer to all of the rest of the media, ABC and CBS and CNN, NPR, the New York Times, as, quote, the mainstream media, as if one of the most popular TV networks in the country is somehow not mainstream. That framing has helped Fox and all of its ideological siblings across the media, from radio talk show hosts to podcasters to assorted online personalities, because it presents them as somehow rebellious and anti-establishment. And it frees them from whatever expectations people have of mainstream media. They don't adhere to conventional journalistic standards. They don't even really do a lot of journalism in the sense of reporting. It's mostly opinion, it's mostly loud, it's often crude. And it's not that they are all in lockstep with each other. There are plenty of spats between rivals or their patrons, whether those are corporate owners, major donors, or powerful politicians. But they share a lot of generally conservative right-wing views of the world. They hate taxes. They don't like rules or laws on how you can do business. They are deferential to corporate interests, in particular the fossil fuel industries and, increasingly, Silicon Valley. They have for years given voice to the kinds of racism and sexism and anti-gay bigotry that has been increasingly pushed out of the mainstream media. They're hostile to immigrants, particularly poor and non-English-speaking immigrants, and hostile in general to people who are not white and Christian. And they traffic in a constant stream of daily outrages to keep their audiences stoked with drama and righteous grievance. The view of the world presented by the right-wing media is built around a never-ending narrative of dastardly evildoers out to destroy your way of life. All social ills or even natural catastrophes can be attributed in one way or another to the chosen villain of the moment. Those villains vary but rotate through a familiar cast. Radical leftists, liberals, feminists, scary black and brown people, Muslims, immigrants, gay people, transgender people, Marxist college professors, Jewish financiers. During the COVID pandemic, public health officials, scientists, and doctors got added to the list. Some of the more recent villains are broad concepts: critical race theory, gender theory, DEI. DEI, for instance, has been blamed without any evidence at all for everything from airplanes crashing to California wildfires. Social media has been a tremendous gift to this machine built on endless tales of peril. A short video clip of something scandalous can ricochet through the right-wing media system in hours, if not minutes, and can generate hours and hours of content via constant replays, followed by outraged responses and calls for investigations. That these clips are often out of context or outright manufactured is entirely beside the point. The point is to keep the audience mad and coming back for more. And it's not just the hosts who foment the anger and anxiety. Politicians join in, mostly Republicans, and these days often members of the Trump administration. Of course, many of those administration officials were themselves plucked from right-wing media, of which Trump is a huge consumer. Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Sean Duffy, Janine Pirro. All of this makes for an ecosystem that is endlessly hungry for enemies to identify and fight, and one that includes people with the political and economic power to quickly translate those impulses into action. That's what I mean by the right-wing media breaking containment. The things that are said there, the priorities that are set, no matter how crazy they seem or how detached from observable reality, can now lead to direct action at the federal, state, and local levels. This was, of course, the field that the late Charlie Kirk played in. He was an outrage merchant himself, under the guise of a so-called debater. His staged events were essentially political rallies that both energized his supporters and created clippable video content he could use across his many media platforms. You can see this on the YouTube channel of the organization he founded, Turning Point USA, in videos with titles like, quote, Charlie Kirk's Most Savage Campus Moments of Spring 2025. That one has 6 million views. And the universal messaging across the right-wing media in the aftermath of Kirk's murder, the elevation of Kirk to a kind of sainted martyrdom, the organized backlash against anyone who criticized his politics and words, showed the power that system can now exert over politics and dialogue. All of which brings me to Tennessee State University. The school in Nashville is the only publicly funded historically black university in the state. It was established in 1912 as the Tennessee Agricultural and Industrial State Normal School for Negroes, a product of the segregated Jim Crow era. It is small, with just over 5,300 students enrolled this year. Black students make up about 75% of the current population, with the rest divided between white, Hispanic, multiracial, and international students. It has been embattled in recent years by the Republican supermajority in the Tennessee legislature. Legislators have accused the perennially strapped school of fiscal mismanagement, particularly in the wake of a scathing state audit. And last year, the legislature passed a bill to vacate TSU's entire board of trustees. Governor Bill Lee appointed a whole new board. TSU has argued that it has long been underfunded by the state, an argument supported by a federal report in 2023, which found Tennessee had shortchanged the school by a cumulative $2.1 billion. The state has since provided about $250 million in new funding. This was the campus that two internet provocateurs modeling themselves after Kirk decided to visit unannounced on Tuesday, September 23rd. The duo were Cam Higbee and David Cate, who call themselves Fearless Debates, which you can find at fearlessdebates.com. They appear to be in startup mode as one of several self-styled Kirk successors racing to take up his microphone, and the celebrity that went with it. They brought a table and chairs and some placards onto TSU's campus. Wearing red MAGA hats, they attempted to provoke arguments with passing students by displaying signs that said, quote, DEI should be illegal, and deport all illegals now, let's talk. What happened next has been given different framings in different places. TSU officials said the pair had not made any arrangements to come to campus. In a social media post, the administration said, quote, in accordance with campus policy, any demonstration or protest activity requires advance approval and permitting. Campus police and staff responded promptly, and the individuals were escorted from university grounds without incident. At all times, TSU students conducted themselves in a professional and respectful manner, unquote. But video clips showing students heckling the two and telling them to leave, while the fearless debaters were, of course, filming the whole time, quickly circulated through right-wing social media, painting a picture of a hostile black crowd forcing the two white men from campus. In an interview with Nashville's Fox 17 News, David Cate of Fearless Debates defended the team's choice to go to a mostly black campus to try to start racial arguments. He said, quote, "Is there a reason why we shouldn't go to historically black colleges to have these conversations?" Unquote. He accused the crowd of students of encouraging violence, but there were no reports of any physical altercations. Cate's LinkedIn profile lists his current occupation as influencer and says he is, quote, "a dynamic content creator and entrepreneur with a passion for sparking conversation and driving impact." The stunt at TSU definitely sparked conversation and drove impact through the right-wing media. Fox News reposted one of the Fearless Debate Group's videos, generating millions of views. Shared through social media, it generated calls for the school to be penalized or defunded by the state. It also inevitably brought the attention of Tennessee's Republican politicians. Senator Marsha Blackburn, who is running for governor in 2026, chastised TSU students for, quote, "chasing conservatives off campus." She said, quote, "Our colleges must return to robust, respectful debate. It's up to faculty and leadership to set the example," unquote. As if going onto a campus of mostly black students with signs calling for diversity efforts to be criminalized is a form of either robust or respectful debate. My own Republican congressman, Tim Burchett, posted, quote, "Like most of Tennessee, I am disgusted by the behavior of Tennessee State University, even more so by the administration. It's not going to change until we quit hiring folks that support this activity." So within just a few days, two basically unknown guys with a couple of homemade signs, a folding table, and a camera were able to entirely manufacture a confrontation, which they juiced for maximum attention and provoked reactions from some of the most powerful people in the state, and put a historic black state institution on the defensive, all by leveraging the well-oiled and orchestrated machine of right-wing outrage media. And now the rest of us have to pay attention to it too. Okay, now we're to my interview with Corbin Trent. Trent grew up in East Tennessee and has a deep and varied political resume. He was a co-founder of Justice Democrats, a progressive political action committee formed by veterans of Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. He also worked with Ocasio-Cortez, serving as her communications director, and worked for Sanders' 2020 campaign. And he's been involved in other efforts to build networks of progressive candidates and influence. He has also worked as a real estate developer and general contractor. And most recently, he launched a new media project called America's Undoing, which you can find at americasundoing.com. He's using it to talk through the obvious challenges for progressives in the current political landscape, but also what he sees as opportunities and needs. He's begun mapping out the core of a populist progressive platform. I especially recommend a recent post, linked to in the show notes, called How to Beat MAGA in 2026, 2028, and Beyond. I enjoyed talking to him about all of that, as well as how his Tennessee roots shaped his politics. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. So, Corbin Trent, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
And by here, we are both in Tennessee, and I know you grew up in Tennessee, and so that was kind of, by way of background, I wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about that, where you grew up, and how and to what degree that shaped your political awareness. Kind of what did you take away from your Tennessee upbringing that's kind of led you to where you are now?
I grew up in Morristown primarily, and most of my family lived there. Aunts, uncles, mom, father. Everybody was sort of Morristown centered. But then my grandfather lived in Hancock County, right up on the border of Virginia and whatnot there, which is this little bitty, very poor county. It used to be one of the poorest in Tennessee. A town called Sneedville is where he lived.
Morgan Wallen's hometown.
It is. It is. And watching Morgan, I don't know. It's always befuddled me how Sneedvillians and Hancock County residents have the politics they have. But for me, growing up in spending my weekends in Sneedville, spending most of my life in East Tennessee, I lived with my father. I lived like in downtown Morristown, and then with my mother, I lived on my papaw's 40-acre farm in southern Hamlin County. And to me, it shaped a lot of what I held, what became my political ideology. I grew up surrounded by the interstate highway system. I grew up surrounded by TVA lakes and dams. I grew up surrounded by hearing stories about the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Manhattan Project. I would hear stories about rural electrification. My wife's father or grandfather rather worked as a lineman and back in the day, and was actually part of the rural electrification process where they were, building all these high voltage power lines across East Tennessee and electrifying the South. So, when I think of Tennessee and its history and its and how it was created into a more modern area, then for me that's just such a connection to federal unity and working together as a people. And so it shaped a lot of my politics, and that's really where I come from when I'm describing solutions. It's sort of very informed by that.
Yeah, well, and so let's jump forward and talk about what you're doing now, because obviously you've done a lot of things over the last 10, 15 years in particular, very involved with Justice Democrats, with Bernie Sanders, and with AOC, and several efforts since then, but all kind of focused on finding ways to really platform and bring progressive politics into the American political mainstream, very much the Democratic mainstream, and that, of course, has run into resistance as it does. So what we're in a really specific and weird political moment and era right now, especially for anybody involved in progressive politics. And you now have a project, a website called America's Undoing. Can you talk a little bit about that title? What do you mean by America's Undoing, and what are you doing?
I was back in, I did a lot of various iterations of political activism. And then I left and actually I was a general contractor for 3 years. Then Trump was reelected. And the thing that I found most frustrating, I don't know if you can say what's the most frustrating thing about Trump, but one of the things that frustrated me was that there were these bits and pieces of the narrative that I had been trying to promote for years. And this narrative of reestablishing our means of making a living, as he called it in his first campaign, reshoring our manufacturing, retooling our industrial base, getting rid of this sort of atrophy that we have in the country when it comes to productivity. And he was even promoting the idea of creating new cities, right? This was an FDR idea back in the day. And they're like green. I don't remember what the name of this particular project was. It was declared unconstitutional, and only 3 of these cities were built. But there was this idea, so I was seeing all this stuff that I found to be like low-hanging fruit for the Democratic Party to be representing. It seems very FDR-esque with a little, just with a good fascist twist, right? And I felt like the first Trump administration we had sort of dodged a bullet by Steve Bannon being sort of excommunicated. One of the things I said was, if my cousin who's an electrician comes to me and says, hey, I've got a scale job working at Y12 or whatever for $47 an hour or $65 an hour, then we're done, because they've figured out how to win hearts and minds through the pocketbook. If they're going to start doing these big projects like FDR did, which led to huge majorities in the House and Congress, winning states, this is a long-winded answer to your question. But what am I doing now? So one of the things that I think is critical for a solution, for coming up with a solution, is to understand and agree upon the reality in which we live. And that is something that is not an agreed upon notion in any way whatsoever. Like even the concept of has neoliberalism, globalization, and deindustrialization been beneficial to America broadly and to most Americans? Now, if you ask anyone in academia, anyone at the Fed, anyone at BLS, or any of their talking heads like Matthew Iglesias or No Opinion, Noah Smith, and these folks, what you'll hear is, and I believe Noah's quote on my podcast was, unequivocally, absolutely, 100%, yes, it has been great for everybody.
Because they're just looking at sort of numbers going up on the graph, and that automatically means American prosperity, right?
Yes. And so even Bernie Sanders falls into this trap of, and he'll say this all the time, in the richest nation in the history of the world, right? And it's true on paper. We are the richest nation. I mean, now it's a little bit debatable with China, but still, we're an ultra wealthy nation, historically speaking. But that, it's sort of like being Bill Gates' kid, and, he's got like 10 kids, and 8 of them are living in shacks. 2 of them are, to get the sort of the semi-Bill Gates kid life experience, and the rest of them, don't. And that's what is happening in America. 80% of Americans live in one reality, and then 20% of Americans, and then the further up you go, those realities shift even further. And so the original idea behind America's Undoing was to talk about these things and to talk about the realities in which people live, to show the statistics, to try to make the argument that actually no, neoliberalism not only has not been lifting all boats, it's been drowning many, many people. And that problem and that disconnection between what's happening to people because of our economic system has prevented Democrats from responding to the needs of people in a way that's left an opening for Trump. And it's now multiple times. And I would say that, it's a similar feeling that led to people backing Obama the first time, which was a historic victory. Like he had big wins, or backing Bernie Sanders in 2016, or Trump in 2016, or even Howard Dean. I don't know how far back we go, but so I wanted to be able to explore these topics. One of the things that has driven me crazy around one specific policy, and I tried to write about this, is healthcare and Medicare for all. And the idea on the left, the prevailing idea on the left, is that what we have is inadequate distribution of money. And that's not disputable. I don't dispute that that's the case. It is the case. But that through redistributing the money, we would solve our healthcare crisis, or our housing crisis, or our educational crisis, or, that it's a problem that we can buy our way out of and redistribute our way out of. But when you look at the data right now, we know and can see, everybody that's done the studies, our healthcare system is inadequate for providing healthcare coverage to the entire nation. It does not exist. There's healthcare deserts. We're short, 30,000 primary care physicians. The number of people we're short in terms of mental health care is insane. And the number to have a non-healthcare desert for mental health, all you've got to have is one psychiatrist for 30,000 people. And then that's good. That's considered good. If it's a really vulnerable area, you got to have one per 20,000. Now, that's not patients, that's people, right? But anyway, so then I thought to myself, well, if we can, because I tried to make this argument when I was on staff with AOC. I tried to make this argument, that we should not be to the Medicare for all. We're the we're the extreme version here. We should be putting out, VA for all or TRICARE for all, like actually getting back to the idea where, like in Tennessee used to own about 50% of the hospitals and clinics and all the delivery, not just the insurance, but the actual health care. Morristown Hamblin Hospital. It wasn't just a clever name. It was owned by the county, Same with University of Tennessee. That was owned by the city of Knoxville. And then, so on and so on and so on. Maryville had a hospital that just sold last year to a nonprofit, was owned by the county. So I spent a lot of time trying to make the argument that this is not just a money problem, that it is a capacity, capability, and competence problem.
And that basically that capacity and capability should come from the public sector. I mean, you just wrote something recently arguing that it's not a matter of getting rid of, the existing private healthcare structure, but just creating a competitor essentially on the public side.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the keys. And a lot of folks will disagree with me that capitalism is actually a fairly functional system when it works. I'm a big analogy guy or metaphor. So like I feel like the engine of capitalism is seized, like a motor in a car. And it's no longer, whether it's healthcare, housing, childcare, education, it's no longer actually producing the product that you would assume it's producing. Like if you have an assembly line that's making cars and then out comes just, dollars instead of cars, you'd think, well, this is a dysfunctional line. We don't want just dollars. So what's happening in healthcare is we're spending more than any other country by a huge, huge margin. We're on track right now to spend $8 trillion a year by the year 2032, and that's only 7 years from now. $8 trillion a year. And on that projection, we'll still have these healthcare deserts. We'll still have trouble getting primary care physicians, and it'll actually get worse because of our aging population. And the only way to compete and to reignite the engine of capitalism is through competition. And unfortunately, there is nothing that's powerful enough, strong enough, or well-funded enough to compete with United Healthcare or any of these huge conglomerates than the public sector. I just don't think that it exists. You can't you're not going to get enough private equity firms together to compete because that's not what they exist to do. They don't exist to provide healthcare. They exist to provide profits. So you have to have a countervailing force to keep capitalism functional and to make sure that the product that's being produced by that sector is the one you want. That's my theory on the matter. Anyway. That's my thinking. And, and the stats bear it out. When you look at when we've had functional sectors that produce things, when you look at other countries that have this, like China, or not China, but Japan, I think still owns about 30% of its healthcare productive capacity. Canada just built I don't know if it's launched. I believe it's actually active now. They have a state-owned pharma production manufacturing plant. If it turns out that big pharma can't make insulin effectively and cheaply, then, it turns out we could make that. Like the American people don't need permission from, big pharma to make our own stuff. We don't need permission from big ag. We don't need permission from any of these fucking people. It's like we can do this. They don't have a monopoly on the ability to make insulin or antibiotics or build buildings or any of this stuff. They don't.
Right. And obviously that what factors in there is the constant refrain from the right for so long now that basically government can't do anything. And there's been this very deliberate undermining of public confidence in the ability of government to do things.
Exactly.
As you say, that has gone hand in hand with an era where government has been, sort of outsourcing all sorts of things to the private sector with some of the results that you're talking about. And I know you've been kind of crowdsourcing, I guess, a platform. Is that an accurate way to phrase it? In the absence of this kind of big picture platform that you're talking about coming down to us from the Democratic Party or whoever. And this was something I had wondered, because this definitely seems like a time for an equivalent to a contract with America from the left, and I've kind of wondered why we don't see that happening. So I guess is that your thinking in trying to put that together?
It is, because my opinion is that we're in a moment in our history that is ripe with opportunity. And that opportunity, one of the phrases that I hate is the arc of justice is long, the arc of
history is long, but bends toward justice, right?
Yeah, I despise that idea. And the reason is because I don't think anything bends on its own. It's bent, right? And if we don't intercede in this moment with an alternative direction for that arc, then I think MAGA, I think Trump, I think, a lot of the downstream people in that movement they're doing a better job at identifying the problems, which are some of the things that I just outlined. They'll tell you the same things as problems, right? Then they'll identify the enemies, and it'll be the government, it'll be immigrants, it'll be DEI, it'll be, racism, which is a very tried and used tool. And then they'll ascribe the way to fix it. And the frustrating thing for me is that I don't disagree with the idea that what you need is a very, very powerful movement to fix our underlying problem. And in my mind, there are only two ways to get that. And I don't know if this is right. This is my interpretation of the situation, though. And one of those is through authoritarian, sort of dictatorial regime or monarch. There's even some people on the right suggesting we should get a monarch. And that would give us the capacity to fix the deep rot that is causing these problems. That's one way. And in some ways, it's the easier way. And so I can understand why people might even be drawn to that idea. The other way is to do something like we did in the 30s and 40s here in America, which was building towards supermajority trifectas. And the Democratic Party, at least since I've been alive, I'm 45 as of a few days ago, I've never seen a Democratic Party that is actively trying to position itself to win trifectas, to win supermajorities, to win, it's tried to triangulate and maintain these sort of, 52, 53%, here and there, and then work towards bipartisan solutions. And I think that we've come to the point, and I think we were there for a long time, but I hope we've come to the point now that we can realize that there is no bipartisan solution with folks that, like, I can't negotiate on dinner with you. I say, let's have steak. You say, I'd rather go eat out of a garbage can. Then, I guess we could negotiate, but we have such opposing ideas of what dinner's going to be. I don't know that we should negotiate that, right? So that's why I started putting this thing together, is because I think it's important to be able to see a future. Like when I was with AOC, again, like what we tried to put together with this thing called a message from the future. It got away from me as far as being able to have input on how it was produced after the broad idea. But the broad idea was, we used to have the Jetsons. We used to have World's Fairs. We used to have this sort of, our sci-fi was futuristic and looking forward. It wasn't all dystopian. A lot of it was utopian. And if we can't have a utopian vision for the future that we're trying to strive for, then we're not going to be able to build towards anything remotely approaching that. And so that's what I've been trying to put together, is what that would look like. But then make it broad enough that people could actually endorse it. Because I believe that the other thing is this, all the things that Bernie and AOC have done that have been great, or that Bernie's done on this, Stop the Oligarchy tour, and he's endorsing some candidates earlier in the cycle than he's ever done. But what he's not doing is endorsing against entrenched Democratic incumbents while telling us that they are the problem, or at least part of the problem, right? And so I think an intra-party, an inter-party debate to figure out who we are as a party and what we stand for is critical, because right now the prevailing wisdom is that what we stand for is not that. Right. And I just don't think that I believe we've tried that multiple times.
So in thinking about this, particularly from the position of the South, I feel like there is an assumption that, maybe those ideas and candidates like that can work in New York City, in Los Angeles or whatever. But, if you want to run anybody in the South, you kind of just have to run the most absolutely moderate, middle of the road person you can find, and just kind of, try to present some sense of competence maybe, and that you're a little more caring than the other guy. Do you think that's true? Or, obviously there are, like Zoran Mamdani as a candidate, demographically, you would not run in most Southern districts. But I feel like some of the ideas that he's talking about could translate pretty easily into a lot of, especially the poorer parts of the South, which there are a lot of.
Yes, and I think John Edwards ran on some pretty bold things back in, what is this, 2004? I'm showing my age here now. But I think that to give, like Tennessee in 2010, before the election, we have 9 reps at the federal level. 5 of those reps were Democrats. Now, they were, in my opinion, sort of shitty kind of centrist Dems that were the kind of Democrat that led to us having now 1. Part of that's also redistricting and gerrymandering. There's other elements here too. But they ran Phil Bredesen for Senate, right? And God bless him. I met him at a fundraiser in Hamilton County at John Litz's farm. And I talked to him about a couple of big ideas, and he was just not into them. He doesn't believe in any change. The fundamental core of what we would call a centrist Democrat is that the system is more or less working. We're communicating poorly how well people are doing. We're communicating poorly how good our policies are. We just need to get better at communicating. And that, I think, the reason that does not connect with anybody in the South, or even, Donald Trump won the popular vote, not by a ton, but he won it. The reason our brand, and he did that against what you would consider all odds, like he did that in spite of who he is as a person, not because of who he is. And so that's one of the things that frustrates me when we talk about this moderate voter, this middle of the road voter. When you look at the crosstabs of anybody trying to figure that out, it ain't what they're looking for. What they're looking for is rapid, radical change. And they keep searching for it, and they keep not getting it. And now they're getting what Trump promised. It's not going to work, like something as basic and simple as the tariffs aren't, tariffs are protectionary. They're good for protecting existing industries. They're not good for building new ones. That takes effort. That takes, and we've got a real lazy group of people running this country right now and running our industries and our businesses. They would rather do stock buybacks. They'd rather sell meme coins. They'd rather, they want easy money. That's the reason Trump wants to get interest rates lower. He wants easy money back in the economy. And he understands how that can boost things and make things look good statistically. So no, I don't think you need to run candidates like that. I don't think they're going to do anything useful. I think the proof in the pudding will be that it's the same old shit. And they, so if you ran on somebody with Zoran Mamdani's platform in Tennessee, would it work? I don't know. If you ran somebody with Joe Biden's in Tennessee, would it work? No, it didn't. He didn't win. Neither did Kamala's. Neither did Hillary's. Neither did Phil Bredson's. So why keep trying the same dumb shit? That don't work either. So why don't we try something bigger, something bolder, something that acknowledges that this isn't working? And that is the thing that the Democratic Party, by and large, does not want to admit, that this system of neoliberalism isn't functional. And, even people I love and respect, like Joe Stiglitz, wants to say that there's no way to bring manufacturing back. It's not really something we can do. But then at the same time, they'll say manufacturing is headed towards automation. Manufacturing is headed towards robotics. It's not even going to be that many jobs. All the more reason to have that here. If if it's being produced in what they call dark factories, then whoever owns those dark factories has got a lot of power. Economically, socially, internationally. If you're producing all the things that, we think of the economy. And I remember this back in the COVID days. I remember talking to a lot of lefties that were like, we're not willing to shut down the economy to save lives. And I was like, guys, you realize the economy is not Wall Street, right? The economy is like food and clothing and shelter. And like the economy is an actual thing that produces the things that keep us alive. If you stop the economy, people die.
Right.
I mean, so, and I think they've got to reconnect these sorts of things. Anyway, that's a very meandering answer, but I'm a meanderer.
But gets to the basic idea that there needs to be a forward-looking set of ideas and a narrative that is not just what I kind of take from current Democratic leadership, which is like, can we just get back to 2016? Everything seemed pretty good then. And clearly everything didn't seem pretty good in 2016 because we wouldn't be where we are now if that was true. I wanted to end by just hitting on something specific to Tennessee that is apparently about to happen. And by the time we release this, it may already be in process. But apparently we're going to get federal troops or National Guard in Memphis. And I think this is an interesting move. And it's not the only kind of blue city in a red state that they've talked about doing this. New Orleans is also apparently on the list. But this dynamic seems to me very different than what we've seen in Los Angeles or DC or the discussion around maybe sending troops to Chicago, because in those cases you had local or state officials who were opposed to it. And here, of course, Governor Bill Lee is saying, great, absolutely, send the National Guard to Memphis to do law enforcement, essentially. And I just wonder if this is a step toward, there's been all this talk about militarizing cities and occupying cities, and maybe an assumption that was going to be a way for them to project power into blue states, which, sure, that is what they seem to be trying to do. But in the red states where we already have our state legislatures that tend to be at odds with our cities and already kind of trying to crack down on them, is there the potential here for the actual militarization of cities to happen first or more in the South and in red states than in the blue states?
So I think there's a couple of different things happening. One is, it seems to me that they're itching for, a lot of this is Stephen Miller. And I think there is some desire to have confrontations, and they're not getting it in the way that they would want. And I believe the idea of going into the blue states and blue cities was to have the leadership of those states and cities sort of, speak out against it, and then that trickle down into action, and then give them sort of carte blanche to ratchet up the violence or the authoritarianism, if you want to call it that. But the irritating thing is that they're able to use reality as an auspice for doing this. The places they're sending these people are indeed high crime. Like, you could send them to, the holler in West Virginia for the same reason. It's just way fewer, there's not as much density, right? So it would be harder to do. In fact, I remember when I moved to New York, my mother-in-law was very scared that I was going into this high. So I sent her the stats to show her that Morristown was actually more violent than the place I was going in New York. But, I think it's twofold. One is, it is a politically smart strategy, because you're going to see, just like in DC, you're going to see stats go forward in the right, in a good way. You're going to see crime rates go down. So it's going to be hard to argue that it's a bad thing to do, especially if you don't see any major violence from it, right? If it's just like people picking up trash and being there, and then their presence for some period of time lowers crime stats, then there's not a lot of pressure for them to do something different. And I think that when they need to then use that as a cudgel, they'll be there. And one of the things that went underreported is there was a executive order, 2 weeks ago, came out on a Monday, and it was about creating this rapid response training for the National Guard, then to be able to deploy those folks and for crime fighting, right, and suppressing crime in a rapid way. The other part of that was in there was the money to create a web portal for citizens to sign up and to participate in this and to join this rapid response crime fighting force. Which sounds a little brown shirty to me. I'm no historian, but don't sound good. So yeah, I think that, they're going to push it as far as they can. The militarization of our police forces is already happening. Tennessee leads in, for-profit prisons. We lead in, we've got so many people. The United States has more people in prison, both per capita and in raw numbers, than most other countries on the planet. So it's a further escalation of, I think, the militarization of our crime fighting. And the question becomes, everybody wants crime as near zero as possible. I think that's a universally held desire. The question becomes, how do you achieve that? And it's like the tariffs. If this were a Band-Aid and then now they're also dumping money into trying to make life more affordable, build more housing, build more jobs, build training, like 50 some odd % of America can't read past the 6th grade level. 20% of America is functionally illiterate. If they were saying, we've got this crime emergency, and for, the next 18 months while we're building back our infrastructure to fight this crime through economic prosperity, through social connectivity, through all this other stuff, we're going to, have these National Guard deployed for a time, then that would make sense. But just like the tariffs, it's not part of a bigger plan. It's not part of a solution. It's just part of a outright control measure.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. But thanks a lot for joining, and maybe I'll give you a shout sometime in the future as things evolve, and check in and see what you think about it.
All right. Look forward to it. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Norman Jones died last week in Arkansas, the state where he was born and lived almost all of his life. He was unquestionably the most important drag queen in Arkansas history and one of the most important figures in the state's queer culture of the past half-century. Jones was born in 1946 and grew up poor, the son of a sawmill and factory worker in various Arkansas small towns. By the time he was in high school, he became the target of bullying because of mannerisms that seemed effeminate. He told an interviewer for the Arkansas Times in 2016 that he ameliorated that particular problem by working his way to manager of his high school's football and basketball teams, earning the respect of the jocks. By the time he graduated from high school in 1964, Jones was aware that he was attracted to men. He sometimes visited the few gay-friendly bars in Little Rock and Hot Springs, but those carried risks. It was dangerous, he told the Arkansas Times. You could be stopped on the street, especially if you were going into the bars. You would be jeered at. People would get out of their cars and throw stuff at you. Ironically or not, his fuller immersion in gay culture came thanks to the U.S. military. After dropping out of college, Jones was afraid of being drafted into the Army, so he enlisted in the Navy. That led to an assignment as a dental technician at Bethesda Naval Hospital outside Washington, D.C., and easy access to D.C.'s lively gay nightlife. When he returned to Arkansas after finishing his tour, Jones wanted to bring some of those good times with him. He became a regular at a gay club in Hot Springs and began doing drag performances under the tutelage of a mentor whose drag name was Tuna Star. Jones' drag name was initially Norma Lou, which he quickly amended to Norma Christie. At the urging of a club owner in 1972, he entered a Miss Gay Arkansas contest, finishing second. When the first-place finisher had to step down, Jones assumed the title, and went on to represent the state that year at the first-ever Miss Gay America contest in Nashville. Unexpectedly, especially by Jones, he won the contest and served as Miss Gay America for the next year. That sent him on a national tour of gay clubs doing drag performances from coast to coast. He also acquired an ownership stake in the Miss Gay America pageant, which he owned and operated for years before eventually selling it. While on tour during his reign, Jones took note of the places he played, and when his year was up, he decided to open a place of his own in Hot Springs. In 1975, he opened a club called Norma Christie's, which became the city's first real disco, just as the disco craze was breaking nationwide. It was an immediate hit with young gay crowds, but with plenty of straight people, too. That success led him to open a second club called Discovery in Little Rock in 1979. It moved to a larger location in 1982, where it is still open and still hosting drag shows along with other entertainment. It has been credited by generations of queer Arkansans for providing a safe and welcoming place. In subsequent years, Jones was prominent in local efforts to help people with AIDS. He watched many friends die. In 2017, after the Supreme Court's Obergefell ruling had overruled Arkansas's ban on same-sex marriage, Jones married his longtime partner, Mark Bastian. In the show notes, you can find a link to a video of Jones performing as Norma Christie in 1988. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org.